All right, well, today I'm going to be chatting with Alessandro. Thanks for coming on the filing cabinet.
My pleasure, Daniel.
Yeah, so basically, the way this episode happened is I had this previous episode on, I guess, by experience learning Latin. And my understanding is that you listened and it piqued your interest because you had some experience with the same topic. Do you want to say roughly what that is?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So I studied Latin about starting about 15 years ago, and I did it very differently from how you did it.
Hmm.
And I thought it was really interesting to hear the way you went about it through this community of autodidacts in this way, also focused on using the language and learning through the language,
Hmm.
using the textbook Lingua Latina per se illustrata, right?
Yep.
Which is super differently from how I did it. And I'm happy to talk more about my background.
Yeah. So how? Yeah. How? In what context? Yeah. I guess first of all, what? Yeah. What made you decide to learn Latin?
Right. So when I was about 17 years old, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I was really into ancient philosophy and, in particular, Aristotle. And so I thought,
Hmm.
okay, I want to be an ancient philosophy professor. And so what I'm going to do is study the languages because that's a concrete skill I can get. Like, obviously, studying philosophy is good, but learning the languages takes a long time. So I want to start that as soon as I can.
Okay.
So in high school, I started learning, and I know listeners can't see this, but I had this famous, possibly notorious textbook called Wheelock's Latin, which is a grammar based Latin textbook. And I started self studying from there. And I'm from the Toronto area, so I studied at the University of Toronto, and I did Latin and Greek as my two majors.
Okay. So why? I don't know. Maybe there's some amount of a package deal, but like there's something kind of strange about you saying, "Oh yeah, you're really interested in Aristotle," and so you started studying Latin, right? Um,
Yeah,
were you also interested in like Latin authors, or was it a sense of like, well, these are the classics, and you know, there's probably a bunch of stuff in both, or
yeah, that's a really good question. So the reason is like partly just how the departments are designed in classics. Like
hmm,
people often do both things, and also partly pedagogy. So it's easier to learn Latin, both because it's more similar to English,
hmm,
and also because I would say there are better resources for Latin than for Greek.
okay,
Um, in particular, I mean, the way I was going about it, there was no good Greek dictionary. That's recently changed because Cambridge has a new Greek lexicon. I was really excited when it came
hmm,
out, but it was like after 2020, I think. So like well
right,
after my undergrad days. Yeah. So I decided I would start like getting into this classics world. And obviously, I know that there are Stoics, so I thought this isn't going to be useless.
hmm,
And then also there are later writers who like wrote in Latin about Greek philosophy and vice versa.
sure. How I don't think I realized that the Stoics wrote in Latin. I guess I'm not sure I had a strong impression, but like the one thing I do know is that apparently like didn't Marcus Aurelius write his meditations in Greek? Like
You know what? I've never read them. I think that's true. Definitely for sure. I actually have with me like Seneca, Lucius
right, right.
Seneca. He wrote mostly in Latin, his most famous stuff.
Okay. So so that's why you started with Latin. And I guess yeah, how did you so you start off you're sort of like going through Wheelock's Latin on your own initially, but
Yep.
then like yeah, how long are you doing that before the like formal education starts?
Yeah, I start about somewhere between 6 months and a year. Like I started in grade 12,
Okay.
and yeah, I remember my goal was to skip first year Latin and just go straight to intermediate, and so I was able to do that.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess there's sort of two phases. Like, and it, what was it like? Yeah, what was it like for you initially when you were just like starting off on your own?
It was exciting. I don't know. I felt like I had, I guess it's hard to access that mental state, but I think I
Right.
was starting to get into this, world of like serious ancient stuff, and it was cool.
Okay. So
And
mm,
I was just going to say, from a language perspective, I've studied a few languages. I don't speak anything else fluently, but my family background is Italian, so I had studied a bit of Italian, and so I remember you start with the pronunciation, and so it was just like fun to get like into like how do you say the things and how
right,
is this
right.
similar to or different from Italian. So I remember that, and it felt like putting puzzles together and so on. But I interrupted you. You were going to ask a follow up question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I guess I very strongly relate to the putting puzzles together piece. I think like, so I studied Japanese in high school, and I definitely remember like it was cool to the learning new puzzle pieces and decoding things and putting the pieces together. That was a big part of the appeal for me, especially because Japanese has this very. I don't think I realized how spoiled I was at the time, and like Japanese doesn't have a reputation as an easy language, but
Mm,
grammatically, it's like there are two tenses. There's like past
yeah,
and not past, and that's it.
yeah,
Compared to like I've I've just started what the third past tense in this like Latin textbook. Um,
exactly.
and yeah, it was a good experience. But actually, that yeah, I guess that prompts me to ask: had you studied any languages before Latin?
So in Canada, it's normal to study French.
Hmm.
My mom had her majors in linguistics and French,
Okay.
so I got a bit of exposure. Formally, though, this was probably, I mean, we did do in my French classes for sure, and in some Italian classes I took as a child.
Hmm.
We did a bit of grammar, but you don't really advance very far, and you kind of repeat the same things. So with Latin, I
Right.
learned things a lot more rigorously. For example, you just can't write or say the words correctly. Like, I don't know if you've got into relative pronouns yet, but like, words like,
Yeah.
yeah, like there's this, qui, quai, quad. You can't like get the right form of that if you don't understand how it fits in the grammar, what number is, what gender is, and so on.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I guess yeah, in terms of like what the initial experience was like, so it sounds like it was really fun, but I'm wondering like yeah, concretely like what did it look like? What did you what did you do when you were engaging with Latin?
Right. So this is different at the textbook phase versus the later phases. So I'll
Hmm.
I'll talk about each in turn. At the textbook phase, I was largely just doing the exercises, and I just tried to do everything and
Okay.
check my understanding and so on. I don't think it would be very different from someone who does like math problem sets or something and tries to
Okay.
make sure they feel confident about something.
And the
Or what?
exercises are these like conjugating verbs, putting endings on adjectives, stuff like this.
Oh yeah, good question. So I've actually, I haven't opened this textbook in ages, but I did put it with me. Basically, the exercises are mostly translation. Yeah. So for
Okay.
example, you'll get Latin sentences, and then I think you might have to translate English into Latin in some of these. But then yes, as you say, there are also, I mean, I just thought it was good to do drill kind of things. So writing out forms of new conjugations or new like
Hmm.
sometimes a particular word like qui qui quod that I mentioned that has special forms, and so you just have to. I would just write out the full declension.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. So that's the textbook phase.
Hmm.
Then by second, so when I was in second year university, we're reading quote unquote real Latin literature, and the approach is you go very slowly,
Hmm.
very very slowly, and you have some assistance. Usually, there's a commentary in the back
Hmm.
of a book. Like, so there are these green and yellow books called the Cambridge Greek and Latin Classics, which are some of my favorites. Um, so also, I will mention it because many people have heard of this. There's something called the Loeb Classical Library,
Hmm.
which is published by Harvard University Press. The Latin books are red, the Greek books are green, and
Hmm.
they have facing translation, Latin, English on each side. I tried to avoid those because I found myself wanting to like cheat too much. I didn't find
Hmm.
the temptation was strong. So then what I was doing was I would get a text in the target language, and I would go through it. I would make sure I understood, sentence by sentence what was happening, or word by word what was happening, rather, and that I could account for, you know, I could account for every word form. So it's very slow. Like I understood why is this in something called the ablative case, for example. And if
Hmm.
I didn't understand, I would try to figure that out. Um, and then I didn't bring this with me, but I made notebooks of vocabulary. So if I found a word that seemed at all important, like maybe a particular species of bird, not so important, right? Something very specific, but
Hmm.
any word that seemed important at all, I would write it down, and if I found myself looking it up again, I would I would usually remember. So I would make flashcards for those specific words. I hadn't
Okay.
heard of Anki at the time.
Yeah. So when you say you would make flashcards, is this just like physical pieces of paper that you
Physical
had in
pieces
a?
of paper. That's right.
Wow, old school. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you said you were going like very slowly through these texts. Like what's um yeah, concretely how slowly?
Yeah, so over a semester, which is 13 weeks, I guess, of study, you
Hmm,
read about 20 pages.
okay. So not super fast, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it does, and by fourth year you do accelerate maybe to twice that speed, but even by the end of an undergrad degree, at least at the University of Toronto, you're not going super duper fast. Yeah.
Okay. And so we've gotten into the university stuff. So in university, is it roughly you learn the basic grammar from the textbook before university, and then in university, like the main thing you're doing is reading these texts, or is it something else?
Yeah, I know this will vary depending on where people are learning Latin and whether it's assumed that you have Latin in high school. So
Hmm,
in Canada, Latin in high school is highly unusual.
yeah.
So the first year classes are designed to start you from the beginning. As I said, I skipped that for Latin. For Greek, I did go from the beginning,
Hmm,
right? So for Latin, what they'll do is the first year is just like a textbook like Wheelock's Latin, where you're learning the grammar. For
yeah.
Latin, you can get through the whole thing in first year. For Greek, it takes a bit more time. It's usually a year and a half.
Hmm,
Um, and then in second year, so I'll just talk about Latin for now. So you will go to some kind of um, graduated reader, which will have small excerpts, and it may be slightly edited for simplicity to avoid the tricky spots.
hmm,
And the one we had, I think it was called the Oxford Latin Reader, but I can confirm and follow up. The there were glosses on the facing page, so rather than having to go to like an endnote section for commentary, I would you would see helpful hints on the side, though not a direct translation.
okay.
Yeah, and then by third year you're reading, like as I said, real literature.
Cool. And so I guess listeners maybe can't tell, but you did finger quotes when when you were saying real.
Yes,
What's the qualification? Why isn't it like real real?
right. What I mean is, it actually is real. I guess I was. So I mean so what I mean is in third year you are reading unedited passages, whereas in second year you're reading edited passages. So
Right,
I
right.
guess they're not actually real. But I mean the thing that I guess is kind of funny is that you're definitely reading real literature, but the way we go about it in this system is it's as though like imagine trying to teach English to someone 2,000 years from now, and
Hmm,
the way they do it is they get a grammar textbook, and then one day it's like, okay, here's like half of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, right? There's
hmm.
no like, there's no hop on pop step, right? Or
Right,
even
right.
a young adult novel step. Yeah,
So hang
in
on,
between.
in the grammar, so in Wheelocks or whatever, like
Yeah,
so yeah, maybe I should say a bit about where I'm coming from. So
yeah,
my approach is basically I have this book Lingua Latina Persa Illustrata, and so I'll read a chapter, and each chapter will introduce some new words and also some grammar concepts. So like chapter 15, Magister et Discipuli, and it's got a bunch of vocab, and it's also doing the personal verbs, so first, second, third person, singular, and plural, just what those endings are, right?
right,
Um, and so it'll like have the thing. It will explain the grammar in in Latin, like as much as one can. Usually just by giving a bunch of examples, but also they'll have little tables of uh, the rows are first, second, third, and the columns are singular and plural, sort of thing.
right. So
And then
part
there'll be
or
some
whole declension. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
sorry.
and then there'll be some exercises at the end. So the first one is like just putting the endings on words. The second one is like getting words from context, and then the third one, there are just some questions about what happened in
Hmm.
Latin, and you're supposed to answer in Latin. Um, and then there's like a supplementary book of little stories. There, a supplementary book of little stories that use the same vocab, and there's a supplementary book of exercises. And so there's that. And I also have this textbook that is apparently used a bunch in the UK. It actually just arrived, the Cambridge Latin course. And in that, so this is like sort of more similar to what I would have learned Japanese in. And basically, the format is you have like you'll have a chapter, and then at the start of the chapter, uh, you'll have a short, a short bit of text. And it'll be like 10 lines or 15 lines or something, and then it'll say like, oh yeah, this is the new thing in grammar that we study in this text. So
Hmm.
so in Wheelocks, were there not even the like short bits of text explaining the grammar, or sorry, not explaining, but illustrating the grammar?
Sorry, there. So the way it works in Wheelock is they'll present a concept, and then there will be an explanation.
Hmm.
That will involve phrases or whatever. For example, chapter 30, which is toward the end, I believe, of the book.
Hmm.
Yeah. Indirect questions. So a direct question is quid Gaius facit? What is
Hmm.
Gaius doing? Indirect question, it shows three examples. One of them is rogant quid Gaius faciat. They are asking what Gaius is doing, and the
Right.
what Gaius is doing is the indirect question. So they'll illustrate that kind of thing. Then there will be a vocabulary section where there's just looks like 15 or so words. Then there are constructed sentences that the textbook authors wrote, which are very simple.
Hmm.
And then there's a section called Sententiae Antiquae, which is adapted quotations from Latin literature.
Okay.
And they're just a sentence or two long. Yeah.
So like a bit of reading, but like not like a bit, but not a chunk, is what I'm
Not,
getting.
yeah, not like 5 sentence paragraphs as far as I can recall. I'm double
Okay.
checking this. Yeah.
Um. Okay, I forget where we were when I asked that question. Do you remember?
Good question. Well, you were asking about my textbook learning experience, I think,
Yeah,
and what that looks like.
yeah. What you were doing, and so okay, so you're doing some amount of like learning the yeah. So initially you're learning the grammar, and then you're like going through these like uh edited text, and then you're going through the kind of full bore thing.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I guess maybe I should say maybe I can say a little bit for just to recap sort of what the experience is like for me what I'm
sure.
doing. So yeah, I'm basically still in the equivalent of the first stage. So yeah, going through this like lingua latina part 1 familia romana um that is basically like covering the basic grammar of Latin. And so I don't know, I'm on chapter like 24 of 35. For people who know some Latin, like this is the chapter that covers the pluperfects. Um, so, covering that. And then, so there's a second part in this series called Roma Aeterna. That's basically, yeah, that's basically like simple texts from actual Latin. The typical experience that people have is that like the part 1 to part 2 gap is kind of big. And so there's like, there are these readers that are kind of semi designed to fit in the gaps. So like I think maybe on the Gallic Wars is one of them. Maybe like uh, some of them are actually just things that like some teacher wrote in the 19th century, and it turns out it's useful and it's in the public domain now, so people can read it. So yeah, I think often these yeah yeah it's funny to hear that like there's a gap both in that sequence that you're following and the sequence I'm following. I guess it's like it must be sort of hard to avoid somehow.
I think so that you're kind of just thrown in the deep end.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Have you ever, I'm curious, are you conversational in any other languages,
Not
modern
really. At
languages?
one point, I was near conversational in Japanese, but I've since regressed. Although I still have some of it. I
Right.
watch anime
Right.
or listen to music sometimes, which kind of helps.
That makes sense. The reason I ask is I find with even living languages, it's kind of hard to avoid the like suddenly you're in the real environment problem. And even
Hmm.
just if you're coming from even an intermediate level class, not even a beginner level class, it's hard to even hear the divisions between words when they're
Mm,
spoken at a normal tempo for a native speaker, right?
right. I think I think yeah, in my experience, this was not as bad with Japanese actually. Um,
Cool.
well, it's definitely bad when there are words that you don't know, right? And then like your rhythm is off. But yeah, why wasn't it as bad? I think maybe Japanese has the advantage that like children's cartoons are like considered a respectable like medium or
Nice.
something, and maybe they're
Right.
what's playing the role of intermediate intermediate readers. Yeah, I don't, it's a good question. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that could be it. Maybe I just haven't found the right things, but for all of at various points I've studied Italian, French, and German, and I found all for all of them I like it was just hard to get used to hearing the word divisions. Yeah,
hmm,
when I heard real spoken, um, non-pedagogical, uh, material in that language.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, so moving forward a bit, so you start studying Latin because you want to be a professor of ancient philosophy or someone who studies ancient philosophy.
Mhm.
Um, you you learn the grammar. You like do these readers of like levels of texts of varying levels of reality, right? Um, do you eventually get to a point where you're just like reading stuff and getting stuff out of it the way a professor of ancient philosophy might?
Yeah, that's a good question. My memory of this is that by the time, so I started and then didn't finish grad school, but by the time I was in fourth year and first year of grad school, I was reading Latin. I felt like I could grasp it quite deeply. Like I felt like my reading comprehension was very good. I was
Hmm.
just maybe about half as fast as English at that
Okay,
point at my
that's pretty
peak.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, it got pretty good. Like I worked really hard at it. I spent I don't want to exaggerate, and in hindsight, especially, one could easily do so, but I would guess I spent 15, 20 hours a week for 5 years, 6 years working on it. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it's a long time. The other thing which I did, which was really useful, which was not
Hmm.
part of my formal study, which I should mention, is I tried to dip my toes a bit in the kind of world, something like adjacent to the world you've inhabited,
Hmm.
which is in various cities, but in particular, the one I went to was in Lexington, Kentucky. There
Yep.
are living Latin people who organize conventicula, or like conferences or workshops.
Yep.
And so, which is the one I went to is in Lexington, Kentucky. It's run by Terence Tungberg and Milena Minkova, I believe her name is
Hmm.
Minkova, I think. And yeah, so they both do spoken Latin, and like you're there for a week. They don't even charge tuition. You just have to like show up and pay for residence or whatever. Or at least this
Hmm.
is true. I think I did 2012 and 2013.
Hmm.
And anyway, what was cool about that was like I actually quite like the grammar approach, but the big weakness is it doesn't build fluency. So in
Right.
these
Right.
workshops, what you do is you're not allowed to speak English,
Hmm.
and all of the activities are based on producing original linguistic information in Latin, right? Out of
Hmm.
non-linguistic information. So you'll do activities like everyone is looking at a picture. Terrence likes um, paintings. He likes like old paintings, and so
Okay.
you will describe, like it will be passed around, and you will describe what's in the painting, right? And that's something
Hmm.
that you can do at whatever level of Latin you have. You could
Right.
say
Right.
there is a woman, or you could say the clouds are behind the sea and extended this way, or whatever, right? Like you can
Hmm.
say things at various levels of complexity. So we did activities like that. We did a skit. I'm sure there were conversations, and everything was based in group discussion or group work. So there was just a lot of actively using the Latin, and I felt like that's really what improved my speed around that time.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah, for people who don't know, perhaps counter to what stereotypes might be. I think like there are a few of these, but my impression is that the Lexington one is like maybe the most prestigious, or I feel like
Yeah,
it's the one I've heard of.
I don't know anything about the relative status hierarchy of this, and
Hmm.
my understanding is, in living Latin, there are just various approaches to it, and different
Hmm.
factions kind of disagree. This I don't know too much about, and you may know more than I do. But for one example
Not
of this,
really. I
hmm,
Yeah, I think yeah. Actually, earlier you mentioned like the world I'm in, and it's more like I read r slash Latin, you know, um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
like
I
watch
know.
some YouTube videos. It's not like I'm not actually like taking classes with people or like particularly engaged in the culture, but I don't know, when like you pick some things up, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe I should say the world you have this small window into,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I know it's not your main activity at the moment. So, um, what was I going to say? Like one thing about this, like different approaches to living Latin is what Thunberg and Minkova do is okay. So there's this problem that Latin was a living language last like 1,000 or more years ago, basically, right?
Yep.
And so there are many objects in the modern world for which there is no Latin word. And
Yep.
so what they do in Lexington is they name things with a noun and then a specifying adjective. So an example of this that I
Right.
remember is a pizza is called placenta neapolitana, which is like and it's funny that the English word placenta comes from that, like it's the same word, but
Hmm.
it's like a flatbread, but it's like specifically the Neapolitan flatbread,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And that's how they get to like the more specific meaning. But the downside of this approach is that you have a lot of syllables to describe, something that in
Right,
English
right.
might be just one, two, or three syllables.
Yeah, yeah. So what's it actually so I guess those are the activities that you're doing there. Oh yeah, how many people are at these things?
Oh man, I don't want to get this wrong, but it's like something like 100. It's like between 50 and 150, I want to
Okay,
say.
okay. So it's a big crowd. And like I don't know, what's it like being there? Are you like spending all your time kind of stressed because you can't say anything, or do you feel able to like hang out with people in Latin or
I thought it was great. I had an awesome time. What I love most about it, honestly, this is true of my degree as well. What I love about it
Hmm.
is it's not a lucrative thing, so everyone's there. Everyone who is there because they love it, right?
Right,
They
right.
care a lot about it, so everyone's highly motivated. There's no one there for only instrumental reasons.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was definitely true in Lexington, and yeah, just everyone was enthusiastic. Something that's kind of funny is because your level of fluency is limited, you can't get to things that you might like disagree ideologically about.
Right, right.
Again, I was there before Donald Trump became like an American political figure, but like
Hmm.
I have no idea what the political views were of the people I was talking to. So it might
Right,
have been a
right.
cool like activity that uh, bridges across various divides.
Huh.
This Latin camp, yeah,
Yeah. And I guess it must have been fun enough if you went twice.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Cool. So, okay. So maybe now I'd like to just chat a bit about your Greek learning experience because
sure.
like well, I to give a prelude on my end, like I so there's a okay, Latin has a bit of a it's got a bit of a bait and switch thing going on where you
Hmm.
learn it and you're like, okay, there's like there's like nouns, adjectives, and verbs. How hard can it be, right? And then they're like, oh, there are three verb in the like present third person indicative case. There are three verb endings. Okay, there are three types of verb. And then they're like, nope, psych. There's actually four types of verb. And they're like, psych. One of the types of verb actually splits into two types of verb. Um, and then it's like, oh yeah, there's nouns. How hard can they be? Oh, there's genders. Okay, I know the two genders. Oh, okay, three genders, whatever. All right, so I just have to learn three things, and then it's like, nope, there's cases. How many can there be? Three, and it's like, no, there's six. And then at the end of the bait and switch, it's like, oh yeah, well the best Latin authors, spoke ancient Greek, so you really have to go learn that now. And it's like, man, what? I don't think I signed up for this. Now obviously I'm very far from that point yet, but I don't know. A lot of people do learn both, and I guess I have some stereotypes about what ancient Greek is like, namely that it's harder and more painful than Latin. But I don't know. What was your experience?
Yeah, yeah, it is harder and more painful than Latin. That's true.
Okay.
I mean, so like I was so again, I think the okay, so there are at least two problems. Number one, I don't know of a like very good Greek textbook.
Hmm.
The where I'd be like, okay, this is the one that you should use. because it there's so much information that you need to absorb that
Yep.
really the first question for that I'd have for a learner is like, what is your level of masochism? Um,
Yeah, I
because
think
uh-huh.
on this topic, actually, I don't know, a thing that I do. So I don't know if you ever indulged in this, but one thing one can do when one is studying a language is watch materials that are about studying the language, so as to
Mhm.
strengthen one's ability in one's native language and waste time. And anyway, while I was doing this, I was watching this video about I think this guy called it the Ranieri Roberts approach to learning ancient Greek, and he was basically like, yeah, there's no one good textbook, so here's the method: you're gonna buy all of the textbooks, and I have this spreadsheet of which things sync up where, and you just like read all of them in this order, and then by the end you'll be like possible. It's like, oh man.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty hardcore. That's funny. That might be the best approach. I'm not sure. So basically, like, there's this continuum, and on one end, what I know of is a textbook called Athenasde, or in English
Yep.
speakers say Athanase, I guess.
Yep.
But that's based on trying to introduce it through the ancient language itself,
Yep.
and then in the middle is the textbook I used. It's not this widely known textbook. It's called From Alpha to Omega,
Okay.
and then there's a more famous textbook by Hansen and Quinn, and then the most like grammar forward textbook is one by I think it's Donald Mastronardi,
Okay.
and it's got a blue cover, or at least it used to. I think it's just called Attic Greek, but yeah, it's very information dense.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so I used that as a reference after first year to just refresh myself on various things. But yeah, as you alluded to earlier, um, so as you said, in Japanese, verbs have just two tenses.
Yep.
In Latin, there are many more tenses. And then as you get into other Indo-European languages, this like multiplicative problem just gets worse. And so
Mm.
Greek is one of those where not only is there a passive voice and an active voice for verbs, but there's
Yep.
also a middle voice. And so you have to learn, 50% more verb forms. Yeah. And there are rules about how vowels will combine in these verb forms. Like if the root ends in a vowel, it changes how the ending looks. So it's I don't want to discourage someone who really wants to do it. It's just it will take time. You just have to spend time doing it. So I don't want to like call it a nightmare. I had fun doing it, but it's not something that you can do casually. Like you need to invest enough time that you keep progressing.
Right. I guess it does have the upside compared to Latin of um like in Latin, the first things you can read are like, I don't know. I guess on the Gallic War is like kind of interesting, but like um it's maybe not the considered like the crowning height of Latin literature. Whereas in Greek, like my understanding is that pretty soon you're able to start reading stuff in the New Testament, which is pretty cool in
That's
many ways.
that's true. Yeah, I was in a secular program, so I haven't read bits of the New Testament, but it's in a much simpler,
Mm,
idiom. That it's just much less. The word is periodic. There's much less subordination of like clauses within clauses within
right.
clauses separated by commas. So, um, yeah, like that is a great way to get into it. Um, Even stuff like um, Xenophon's Apology of Socrates. There's
Mm,
Plato's, which is more famous, but Xenophon has one as well. Xenophon's writing style isn't as bad. Plato is actually very fun to read.
mm,
The tricky bit is actually there are words where in English we would say like yeah or for sure, and like an example of this might be something like no totally, where a learner of English would be like what the hell does that mean no
right. Right.
totally, and it's like so you have to get this other book. It's called The Greek Particles, and it's this tome, and it's basically encyclopedic. And so for Plato, you just have to like learn how these particles work so you can understand when someone is signifying agreement and so on.
Mm.
But otherwise, Plato is like he's an amazing writer, like justly famous, like one of the greatest humans who has written anything. So yeah,
Oh
he's
wow.
great. Yeah,
Cool.
and and yeah, it's like some bits I like. There are bits that are strange because he'll have like complex mental images he's showing, and then he's often described like there are places where he just describes geometry and he can't draw a diagram because they didn't do that in ancient
Huh.
manuscripts. So that kind of stuff is strange, but a lot of it is very readable. So there is at least that, and I totally agree with you about the New Testament being like something that a lot of people care about reading, that is quite accessible to new learners.
Yeah. So so yeah, what was your path in learning ancient Greek? It sounds like you started it in university.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I did the first year, second year, third year, fourth year course. So first year and a half, we were working on textbook kind of stuff, as I mentioned, and then we had a graduated reader. I'm trying to remember. I think it was. I will send this to you so you can put it in the description. I think it's like the organization that makes these readers. I think is called like the Association of International Classics Teachers or something.
Hmm.
That might be in the wrong order. But there are these small readers with, again, excerpts from real literature where they have glossed the trickier bits or unfamiliar vocabulary on the right side
Okay.
to make you faster. And then, yeah, and then in third and fourth year, it was all reading ancient literature. I should mention for both Latin and Greek, the way that at Toronto they structure the classes is by genre.
Hmm.
So if you major in one of those languages, you'll have read most of the quote unquote significant ancient genres. So uh, for Greek, examples of this are I did philosophy, so we read Plato mostly there.
Hmm.
Um, Let me think. We did Homer, that was one class. There was lyric poetry, so things like Sappho
Hmm.
there. And Thucydides, so historians, Thucydides and Herodotus.
Okay.
Yeah, so classes are genre based, and yeah. So the biggest gripe that I had at the time about Greek is that for me with my system of writing down vocabulary in my notebook, I
Hmm.
wanted the best dictionary available, and
Hmm.
for Greek there just wasn't a modern one,
Huh.
and it's frustrating because like so yeah. I mean, this is really in the weeds now, but we'll go for it. So
Hmm.
the dictionary that was available in English, it was written in the 19th century, and the
Hmm.
approach at the time was to give the etymology before giving the meaning.
Oh.
And that's like not that useful if you want to know what a word means, right? So
Right. Right.
like an example of how useless this can be, just to give an example from English, which is extreme, is the word nice comes from a word that means ignorant.
Yeah.
And if you started off with that, that would be completely irrelevant to anyone who wanted to learn the meaning of the word nice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's first problem with the dictionaries, and then they just weren't always very clear. And a big thing is with any 19th century dictionary, if there's anything to do with sex, it is not going to explain what the word actually means. Um, like it will
Oh dear.
in the Greek dictionaries they'll gloss it in Latin, and in the Latin dictionaries they'll just say that this means something like gross indecency. But like, is it fellatio? Is it
Right.
like
Right.
masturbation? Like, it's just not clear about. So yeah, so in Latin, there's this amazing dictionary. It's called the Oxford Latin Dictionary. I
Hmm.
believe it was started in the 1960s, but don't quote me on it. It was a multi-decade project. It's great. It's expensive, but like I swore by that. It was super helpful. So nowadays, what's great for Greek learners is there is it's not a huge lexicon. It's intended for intermediate readers, but it's made on modern principles. And so I think it would be much easier for me to learn Greek vocabulary today with a good modern dictionary than it was for me at the time.
Okay. And so okay, you study Latin, you study Greek. You eventually. It sounds like for Greek, do you also reach this level where you can just read stuff comfortably? Sounds like you must.
With Greek, I was never as comfortable, and I wonder if I mean. So part of it is that I never did something like the commenticulum in
Hmm.
Greek.
Do they
I
have
think
those?
another part of me
Do they have those?
probably right. I don't know.
I guess yeah, you'd hope, but I guess I mean my impression is that like I guess I have some impression that fewer maybe fewer people study Greek than Latin. I
Yeah,
guess because it's
my Greek
harder
classes were
and
smaller.
yeah, I guess there's some number of people doing classics degrees who have to do both, but I think my impression is that at least the self study community is significantly bigger for Latin. But
Right.
but there must be some I feel like there's this university of people going to seminaries who need to study ancient Greek, and you'd think there would be stuff like this that was catered for them. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I am not sure about spoken Greek. I do know that there's kind of a parallel universe of people who study Greek for like for studying Christian texts,
Yeah.
because there are separate classes probably offered in religious studies departments, and
Mm.
there are even separate dictionaries that focus on meanings in the New Testament.
Right. Yeah. I guess you've got these like these lexicons, yeah, just of New Testament words and stuff. Um.
Yeah, which is more user friendly if that's all you really want. Then you don't need to see the meanings of this word in Euripides or whatever, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And so that was just like so there just like wasn't overlap of textbooks or anything. Like it was its own separate world of studying Greek,
Are you talking about overlap between Greek and Latin, or between secular Greek and
secular
Christian?
and Christian.
You know what? I just don't really know people who, like, I haven't talked extensively with someone who comes from that world, so I don't know. But I
Hmm.
did notice that there were separate lexicons, and probably like we never read New Testament stuff at U of T.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Um. So yeah, I'm wondering what it's like to be at the end of both of these, right? So you've like learned Latin, you've learned Greek. Like, I don't know how enjoyable is it reading the things in their respective languages. Like, maybe one way to ask this question is if you could like just press a button to learn one of the languages and be able to read stuff. Which would you like more?
Right. I mean, if I could just press a button, I would rather do it in Greek because
Hmm.
I'm more interested in stuff like Plato, right, and Aristotle, as I mentioned.
Hmm.
Um, but I can do another angle on your question. So it's going to depend a lot on like what like so I'll talk about myself first, but then I'll talk about what other people might potentially like want to do based on like other reasons for learning the languages. So um yeah, so the end state for learning Latin or Greek, I would be able to pick up some kind of passage from literature in pretty much any genre and have you know so I definitely would have a sense of what it's about at minimum.
Hmm.
And then more often, I would be able to pick up on things like wordplay. I would be able to pick up on rhetorical strategies. So the reason you read slowly is
Yeah.
you spend time in class talking about why is the sentence in this order, or
Hmm.
why is this word used rather than that word, right? So you
Hmm.
can have a flavor for which words have sort of like a business connotation, which words are only used in poetry, and stuff like that. So I had a great appreciation for the kind of thing Cicero does, where he'll construct his sentences very carefully and he'll produce these big climaxes
Hmm.
by by careful construction of the sentence. So I definitely was able to appreciate those things. I was also able to um, so I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. Poetry is not the reason I started studying Latin or ancient Greek, but
Yeah.
I think they're actually the best reason to not read them in translation, because
Yeah.
any poetry you read in translation, it's just a different product, right? It will
Right.
talk about the same thing, but the sound of the language is tied into what poetry is,
Yeah.
right? So honestly, I really love Ovid's Metamorphoses. I think it's beautiful. It's not that hard to read once you've gotten used to it,
Hmm.
and there are just very very clever things he does with the language all the time. There are little stories which can be retold. Like I still find the story of Icarus really moving in
Hmm.
his in the Metamorphoses. So so there's stuff like that, and similarly for Greek, like I was able to appreciate things like word choice in tragedy or in Homer.
Hmm. Cool.
Yeah,
So yeah, so it sounds like you do this degree, you start grad school. Is this a grad school in philosophy or in classics or
it was in classics. Good
okay.
question.
And then eventually it sounds like you stop at some point.
Yeah, I kind of burned out.
Hmm.
I think well maybe I'll say this actually. My interest just kind of shifted because I went in to undergrad being interested in political theory, and I got more interested in political practice and public policy by the time I started grad school.
Okay. And I guess there's less need for knowledge of ancient Greek and Latin for that.
That is correct.
Fair enough. Um yeah, so I guess yeah, I guess I'm I, yeah, I guess so. I now feel like I have a sense of what your story was like. I don't know. So yeah, like I said, I'm sort of in this somewhat beginner phase. I've been studying Latin for I guess uh, kind of close to 2 months now. I'm still in this beginner phase. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything that you might recommend that I try out or things to pursue?
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. So I don't think I have any advice for you at this point. It seems
Mm,
like continuing to do what you're doing is a good approach. It's working for you,
yeah.
and you might build up more fluency than I had, within my first year of studying Latin. So that's good. The only advice I would give is in the longer term, and so if you're at the point where you're reading, um, ancient literature, then I do think, even though it may be impractical for you, I don't know your situation. Anyway, point is,
Mm,
get the best dictionary you can, because like I feel like that matters a lot.
okay.
Yeah. So like Oxford Latin Dictionary is the best one for ancient literature. If you're near a university and you're more interested in medieval Latin, there
Mm,
actually is a fairly recently, just a few years ago, finished dictionary of medieval Latin, I think from English sources of all things. So do whatever is most applicable to you. I think that helps a lot with the ancient literature.
okay. Cool. Thanks for the advice. Yeah. Uh, I don't. Is there anything else we should talk about? I, I'm a
I,
little bit out, but maybe there are things you want to chat about.
Sure. Yeah, there are a couple of things I will say. So this isn't advice for you, but if there are any listeners who have studied Latin or Greek similarly to me,
Hmm.
right? I would say so. Because fluency is the weak spot of the traditional pedagogy, definitely do something like the conventiculum if you can,
Hmm.
because like the opportunity to like use the language actively will really help your speed. I think that's a really important one. It's also just fun to meet a community of really enthusiastic people. Um, I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, like so right. I wanted to talk about like why someone might bother doing all this, right? Like what I think
Right.
are the good reasons. So I mentioned one of them already, which is if you want to read poetry, then I think it's really worth
Yep.
learning the target language. Um, so the other kind of situation where it's useful is, this is not going to apply to as many people, but if you're like interested in a period like the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, where not as much stuff has been translated into English, it can
Right.
help you just. There's so many sources that have not been translated,
Hmm.
or at least into English. And so it's just like opens up this world of scholarship for you, and you can find out some cool stuff that certainly I don't know about, and many professors in the relevant department don't know about.
Yeah. 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 I
So those are.
guess.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm in this kind of interesting position where like I'm enjoying learning Latin, especially the beginning stages where it's like like I've unlocked the I now know how to talk about things that are in the past, but even more, you know. Um, but like I think I'm probably like relatively anti language learning for the language learning community. Like my considered opinion is like, uh, mostly don't bother. It's really hard, and like you should only do it if it's fun. I
Right, like
wonder.
the marginal return isn't so high, right?
Yeah. Although I do actually, I think one take I have is that if you're so we're currently living in this world where like LLMs are getting better and better, right? Um,
Right,
and if you're like, I think in this world, so there's still the thing where if you want to read poetry, you and if there's like some original language that you want to read poetry in, like there's some original language author of people who wrote some poetry, I think like learning that original language still makes sense. But I think there's also just this thing where like low resource languages or less spoken languages have like risen in relative value just because like I'm pretty sure LLMs are like pretty good at Spanish, you know? Like
right.
I think they're I guess Mandarin is a trickier case cuz the tokenization might be weird. But like I don't know, if you want to learn Akkadian, like or if you want to read stuff in Akkadian, I think it's going to be a while for the LLMs to like get good at auto translating that, and so it's
Totally.
maybe a golden era for learning that type of language. I guess for that sort of thing, Latin is like the worst example because it's like the probably the most attested ancient language.
Perhaps. You know what though? Like, so we always have to say the date in these conversations. It's December 2024.
Right, right.
I haven't tried the frontier models. I haven't tried Claude Sonnet, but everything I've seen like can't translate Latin very well at this point. So like
Yeah,
machine translation of Latin is not that good.
I've yeah, I think this is the like the one thing I have tried doing is I I think I was mentioning this in the last episode, but yeah, there's this world of kind of small publisher like Latin teachers writing little novellas, and like one criticism levied against this world is that the novellas often have mistakes. And so I'm in this position where I'm like, well, I'm not perfect at Latin, how can I tell? And so one thing I was wondering is like, okay, well, can I just like feed photos to Claude Sonnet and have it check? And so I did a little experiment where I would like, so I didn't do it of those, but what I did was I would get these like little Latin stories that were written for beginners. By stories, I mean like 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs or something. Um, and crucially, they're just like in a PDF on my computer, so I can copy paste them. And I would ask Claude Sonnet to like find any errors, and it would say, "Nope, looks good." But then in a different context, I would like copy paste the same thing, but I would just like change the ending of some verb,
Hmm.
and just like do like a few little random perturbations and see like if Claude could pick up on it. And mostly it could not. So
Yep.
it seems like I don't know. That's currently a benchmark that I care about because I feel like initial translation or something like not that. I don't know. Maybe I can do that myself, but like finding errors and things seems like the thing that is probably going to be most useful, at least in the language learning thing. And yeah, unfortunately, Claude Sonnet um, 3.5 new as of when I tested it last month doesn't seem like it's very good at this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really smart way to test. But yeah, everything I've seen, just the LLMs haven't cracked that yet. I'm sure it'll happen one day,
Yeah,
but not
it's
yet.
strange. Like I wonder if Latin's just not in the corpus, or I guess there's this difficulty where like a lot of the material would be medieval and like maybe they have well because don't they get different spelling conventions later?
That's a long thing to talk about. So yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
Spelling, one could say decays, but more neutrally, one could say spelling changes
Yeah.
as the pronunciation of the words starts drifting from what it was, say
Hmm.
around 10 AD or whatever.
Yeah.
So yes, spelling does change. In many modern editions, they will regularize it.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but that's right, the original sources, I mean, so the original sources will often be full of abbreviations, right? I
Hmm.
actually did a paleography course as a sort of fun independent thing in my fourth year,
Oh,
and
cool.
so I got exposed to this. Yeah, it was a commentary on the Gospel of John, and yeah, it was like uh, it was quite a revelation to realize like they never wrote out most like certain words,
Huh.
like a word like even a short word like nam, they
Hmm.
would write a sort of dash over the a to signal a nasal consonant following it, right? and
Oh,
and a
huh.
word like super, the there's a sort of squiggle that signifies that. So yeah, so LLMs would have to learn all of these paleographic conventions.
Right. Well, I mean, I mentioned there are like transcriptions of those online, and yeah, I guess
Yes,
with some of the medieval texts, there are modern editions. Yeah, actually, this is a
right.
thing that I've sort of been like. So there's this question of like how what counts as reading actual Latin, right? And like one version is like, okay, if you're like picking up uh De Bello Gallico off the shelf, then like maybe that's actual Latin. But then you're like, oh, well, if there are spaces between the words and if there are capital letters, then it's not actual Latin. And then I'm like, yeah, it seems like I guess it's interesting that it seems like we don't make that much effort to read the actual things that people actually wrote in for the most part. Or do I have this wrong? Do people try and do this?
Yeah, so that's considered as like an area of specialization, right? If you want to
Yeah,
be able to read ancient coinage or inscriptions, then that's a special thing you study. I got exposed to a little bit of that stuff, but my experience of like orthographic conventions was
right.
filtered through things that modern editors do.
Which is so strange, right? Like when you're studying a modern language, it's not like there's no equivalent separation of like, well, first you study Japanese, and then so that you can read quote unquote Japanese, and then if you like study really hard, you can write a thing that an actual Japanese person actually wrote, right?
Yeah,
There's a little bit of this in terms of like sometimes Japanese handwriting has like simplifications of characters that will not be present in printed material, but like yeah,
yeah.
it's very
I,
funny.
it is an interesting thing to remark on. I mean, I'm very happy with the modern conventions.
Mm.
I consider it a technological improvement that we invented punctuation and
Yeah,
spaces and whatnot.
yeah, no, it's so crazy. Like I might have already told this story, but yeah, like there's like if you compare English or if you compare orthography today to the time of the writing of the New Testament, um, things they didn't have back then include spaces between words, uh, full stops, question marks, paragraph breaks. It was just like block of text, and also like quotation marks. Um, so one fun thing is so in John 3, so John 3, if people have heard like God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever should believe in him will not die but will have eternal life. That's the chapter that's in, and like different translations of the Bible have different opinions about when Jesus stops speaking and the narrator starts after him because like they just didn't have orthography to denote that, and you just had to pick it up from context. It's like I don't know. It's very wild to me. It makes me think like, damn, maybe we should be thinking more about like further orthography reforms we can do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, an obvious one in the age of Twitter is there would be really nice to have a sarcasm mark. But
Yeah.
yeah, there
The
are
problem
many
is, as soon as
proposals.
you invented the sarcasm mark, people would use it sarcastically, and it would not.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
know. I know. This is genuinely a problem. But yeah, what you say is totally right. We do learn, in studying Greek and Latin, how the orthography was different then, so that as you say, like it is unclear, is this a question or a statement? It is
Hmm.
unclear what's a quotation of whom sometimes. And there are also cases where, say, especially in poetry, it's probably on purpose that there's an ambiguity about where a word boundary is.
Huh. Huh. Interesting. Uh, I never. Th- is there an example of that you can give, or is it too like in the
Not
weeds?
off, not offhand.
All right.
Sorry.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um. Yeah. Yeah. Wild. Um. Cool. Well. Yeah. Unless there's anything else, maybe we should wrap up.
In a second, I do have one more thing. I did think of
Oh.
one
Okay.
thing I can tell you, which is if you read medieval Latin, a lot of that is a lot easier to read
Hmm.
than quote unquote classical Latin,
Right. Right.
um, because they were thinking about grammar in a way similar to us. There's
Hmm.
often the same word order and so on. One example of something that's really fun to read, because it even has a different approach to the poetry than ancient poetry, is Carmina Burana.
Hmm.
That is super fun. For example, there's a drinking song called In Taberna.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of medieval Latin which will help fill that intermediate step between, as we mentioned, the things in your introductory textbook versus the very long or complex sentences or very elusive poetry in people like
Right.
Cicero and Virgil.
When you say that they thought of grammar as the same way as we do, is this like including non-English speakers?
I am thinking of, so they thought about word order in a similar way to people in modern Romance languages,
Okay.
right? Because what the language they spoke day to day was something like modern Romance languages.
Okay.
So the order of the verb in particular, the verb is not postponed as often. The
Okay.
verb occurs where we would want it to occur.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So Carmina Burana. Any other recommendations?
I'll have to take a look and follow up. We can put it in the description maybe.
Okay. Cool. Um,
That's it for me.
yeah. Yeah. I guess before we go, if people have enjoyed listening to you and want to follow you on Twitter, is there a way they can do that?
Yep. So my handle on Twitter is Polysisti, Polisisti. And my Blue Sky handle, I will also say, is poly.sisti.ca.
Okay. Um. Oh, actually, wait. Before we wrap up, so yeah, who knows how this will evolve? We're currently in mid December. There's been like some move of Twitter users towards Blue Sky, I guess, in reaction to like Elon Musk. My impression is that it's in reaction to Elon Musk backing Donald Trump in the election and like kind of Twitter seeming to be like tilting right these days. So there's some critical mass on Blue Sky, but it is by no means dominant. And so I don't know, there are a few people in the like me in the position of like wondering if I should be using it. So how are you finding Blue Sky?
I really like Blue Sky. So for me, I definitely have strong political views, but I am very happy to hear from people I disagree with. So for me, it's not about politics so much.
Okay.
Um, what I really like about Blue Sky most is that it doesn't suppress links. And when I
Hmm.
started using Twitter more than 10 years ago, it was to find cool things that people were sharing links to. And now
Right.
you can't
Right.
really use Twitter for that.
And
Yeah.
so and how like how which yeah which communities that you're in are like present and active on Blue Sky? Like what's the conversation actually happening there?
Yeah, so the big thing I like, so the reason I switched to Blue Sky was a bunch of professors were sharing their work there, and I have
Right.
pretty general interests, but like it was be historians or political scientists or economists. So as I mentioned earlier, I am still interested in public policy. It's not my day job, but I still like reading about it. So
Hmm.
I love reading a good economics paper abstract, and I'll delve into the paper itself if I'm super interested.
Yeah, and I guess that's especially a place where links are um yeah, you want links to not be suppressed. Yeah, I guess my one adjacent experience of this is like I have a friend who has set up his like it's not a Mastodon server, but if I nobody is familiar with the thing it actually is, so you can think of it as a Mastodon server, and it's basically like a bunch of these like Twitter replacements are well, they're Twitter replacements. They're sort of modeled after Twitter, and this one the UX is modeled after Facebook self consciously. So like there's
Interesting.
long posts, there's like comment sections that are like comments and they're not like their own first class objects. And right now there are like 5 or 10 people active on it, all of whom I know. So it's sort of this like cozier space that's I don't know. I'm enjoying, but it's not exactly a way to interact with the world. Um, yeah, it's funny how I feel like I'm in this bubble where like actually one of my main social media is Slacks that I'm in. So like my group house Slack, the like random channels of various co-working office Slacks I'm in, like um and I've also seen like some like GitHub issues pages be used almost as social media for certain communities. Um, like somehow I feel like we're in this era where like uh, maybe Blue Sky is the exception, but I feel like a lot of the best social media are like things that are not quite actually social media. Um, I don't know if that's a thing you have a reaction to.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really cool when community forms in the unlikeliest places. Um, I like that you have this sort of mini social media site with a bunch of people that just like the small under 10 people use. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty fun. Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
I would recommend it if you can convince a friend to start a Facebook clone. It's like kind of fun.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely, definitely. And
cool.
the Slack thing sounds like something that is going on generally. Like I've even read an Economist article about the move away from public, like readable by anyone social media to
Hmm.
closed group chats. That's much more common these days.
Yeah.
I do want to say one more quick thing about Blue Sky. So my bull case for Blue Sky, regardless one's political views, is number one the links, as I said,
Yeah.
and the other thing is the core concept of Blue Sky is that you can choose what feed you want.
Yeah.
So the default feeds are like okay. The main ones are like just there's one called following, which is a reverse chronological list of everything posted by people you follow.
Yep.
That can be handy, especially for current like things happening right now. But there were a couple of non-default feeds which I found really useful. So
Mm,
one is mutuals, which is what it sounds like. It
right.
shows just the reverse chronological things from people you're mutuals with. So it might be like closer to you if you want to check on friends there, for example. And the other non-default feed is something called quiet posters. So it's people who don't post often,
Mm,
but they posted something. And so that's great for the prof who posts once a month with their work that they've done most recently, right? That
right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I've actually noticed I've had a problem with this on Twitter where like there's one so there's this I think he's now on Blue Sky mostly. This is Liam Bright, username Lost Positivist, where
Yeah.
he's someone who I would consider following, but he just tweets and retweets so much that if I followed him, my chronological feed would be like 50% this guy's tweets, which like as much as I like him, sorry, that's too much. And then I could use For You, but then it's like 50% like vaccine conspiracy theories or something. So yeah, that actually does sound pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, I think like at the moment I just don't have the impression that like a bunch of people I follow are on Blue Sky. And it's also just like for me one like I'm already on enough things that Blue Sky is like one more and I don't want to have to do it. But like I do think I would prefer the world where people moved to there from Twitter. Um Unfortunately, I'm not doing my bit to solve that collective action problem there.
It's all good. Maybe things will reach a tipping point soon enough for you. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to see how things will evolve because yeah, Blue Sky it's been around for a year or something, and I feel like for some reason, like a month ago or something, there was just this like sudden shift. Is what I perceived. Um.
Yeah, seems to be related to this starter pack thing that they came out with as a feature. So it's an easy way
Oh.
to follow a whole bunch of people at the same time.
Oh. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Um.
Yeah,
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
yeah.
But okay. All right. I feel like I've strung out the ending of this a lot, but
I'm
is
happy to have as
the
many
last time I
combos as
tried to
you
cut it
want.
off, there was something you wanted to say. So is there anything
That's
else?
it.
Okay,
Nope, that's
cool.
it for me.
Well, it's been nice chatting. Yeah, thanks very much for talking. It was interesting hearing your experience, and yeah, maybe I'll see you around. And listeners, if you get since there's been a while since the last time you said your Twitter handle and your Blue Sky handle, maybe you can repeat it.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Polysisti on Twitter, POLISISTI, and on Blue Sky, I'm POLI.SISTI.ca.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting.
Thanks, Daniel. It was super fun.